Sasquatch, ghost, dogman, aliens, demons, shadow people, skinwalkers, even the Fae. Our universe is vast, dark, and wrought with infinite unexplained phenomena. We have tasked ourselves with assisting humanity in finding the keys to unlock the mysteries that abound in and around our world. What we intend to reveal behind the curtain of darkness may very well invoke those fears long tucked away in our memories. We will meet that fear head on as we strive to shine the light of understanding on these phenomena. The goal is to arm you with the power of knowledge to confront and even combat these entities. We welcome you to join us on our quest. We are Midwest Night Watchers.
Hi everyone, welcome to Piercing the Veil.
Hi everyone.
Tonight we got a really interesting show about mushrooms and UFOs and how they're all connected, and it's going to be really fascinating. We'll try to get in depth in it a little bit, plus also have fun with the subject and see where it leads us to. And we got Justin England is bringing it to us. You know, this is his story. He's going to be telling us all about this, and he's on from Cryptid of the Corns. And they call him Mr. E in his chats and stuff like that. And we'll just go ahead and bring him right up and get into it. And hope you guys enjoy this subject.
It's going to be a trippy show.
Hi, Justin.
Hey, guys. How we doing?
Good. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be invited on somebody else's show. I do really enjoy it, so thank you.
You're welcome. This is going to be fun.
Oh, we're going to talk a lot about mushrooms. We'll get into the UFO stuff, everybody at home, but you're going to have to hang on for a minute because we're going to talk about some really cool biology.
All right.
So all your
pop quiz.
Oh, yeah. There'll be a pop quiz always. I was a fishery biologist, not a mushroom biologist, not a mycologist, but I was a fishery biologist with a great joy into the mushrooms. I've never taken psychedelics, just I say that out to everybody. But I don't think you have to experience how trippy these guys actually are. So if you guys are ready, I'm going to get right into it.
Yep, go for it.
And like I say to everything, once again, I'm not a mushroom expert. This is just my understanding of the science. So everybody sees the mushrooms above ground or on the sides of trees. You know, we were talking off air, like hen of the woods is a ground growing mushroom, but stuff like turkey tails and pheasant back grows on the side of trees. Mushrooms take, you know, all the Amiidae mushrooms could be really, really toxic or really, really delicious. Beefsteak mushrooms grow on the side of trees and they taste just like beef. These are the fruiting bodies of mushrooms.
Wow.
Or it'll keep doing that. So these are the sexual organs, if you want to say the other way. So the cool thing about mushrooms is they're not plants and not animals. So some people lump them with plants, some people lump them with animals. They're neither, and they're probably the ancestor to both groups.
Oh, wow.
So they're so much older, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But so these fruiting bodies are very small portions of the actual organism. We were making the joke off air about morels. And everybody finds the little groups of morels, and they pick them up. And, you know, morel stands about 4 inches tall, you know, for our gray morels and stuff like that here in Northwest Ohio. But the actual organism that comes from is like this volume of a camper trailer.
Wow.
So they're humongous under the ground. And we'll talk about some truly humongous fungus here in a little bit. So how mushrooms, the actual thing is called mycelia, the mycelia network, and the hyphae. So for everybody at home, a hyphae is like an individual cord. So if anybody's ever cut open like an extension cord or a big cable, you know, the little tiny cords.
Yeah.
And then the mycelia is the big bundle of hyphae or the big bundle of cords.
Okay.
So it's just easier. I try to give the analogies that are a little easier for everybody to understand at home because it's weird if you've never done the biology side of it. So when we talk about hyphae, we're talking about the individual little tiny strands. And then when we talk about mycelia, we're talking about the big ones. Mycelia actually act just like a nerve system. for the mushroom bodies, for the whole mushroom as an organism. They don't fire the same electrical impulses and chemicals that our nerve system do, but they have their own setup. And they actually show up on some brain graphs, which we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Mushrooms can sing. I don't know if you knew that. And
Oh.
No, we've heard them
Oh,
talk.
cool.
We've heard them hook up leaves on plants and stuff and have an electrical pulse to make like songs and tones. I didn't know that about mushrooms, though.
Mushroom.
so mushrooms, it's called a synthesizer, and it was, you can do it with human brain anatomy. Mushrooms have something much more complex than any kind of plant or anything like that when you hook them up to synthesizers, and they actually react to stimuli. So if you start cutting a piece off, they react very differently than just being given water or given a nutrient bath or whatever. So it shows some kind of at least very basic thought, if not something more advanced, which we'll talk about.
Oh, wow.
These mycelial network also act as their vascular system and their digestive system. So every little piece of mycelia is kind of our whole body in one go. It's the brain, the stomach, the lungs, the vascular system. It's all, every chunk of mycelia can do it independently.
My.
And these guys spread out. They look like your vascular system just laying all over the ground. In fact, we're all Midwesterners here. About 1 square inch of Midwest dirt, healthy Midwest dirt, should have about 6 to 10 meters of mycelia in it.
Oh, wow.
So 1 square inch should have 6 to 10 meters of mycelia, or like a couple hundred miles of hyphae.
Huh.
So when you hear these old stories, and some of these, not even old stories, some of these recent stories of people connecting with the ground, and they kind of draw it when they illustrate their feelings, it looks like lightning or it looks like a vascular system. That's exactly what these giant mushroom networks look like.
Oh, wow.
But these guys, these mycelia networks, are in every environment on Earth. I mean, from the upper atmosphere, which we'll talk about, to the Antarctic ice sheets. There's some fungus that lives in the Antarctic ice sheets in the ice. There's the bottom of the ocean. There's a ton of species that live on the bottom of the ocean, as well as pretty much every land type, whether it's desert, rainforest, it doesn't care. Mushrooms are the colonial massive organism. Now, I've talked about their age. That's kind of an argued part. So mushrooms are a little hard to date as far as life goes. And I know with all of our listeners and how we feel at home as well, the age range of the Earth and how we kind of talk about evolution is highly opinionized. And I'm going to just talk about what conventional science says. This isn't personally my belief. This is what the dates of conventional science.
Okay.
So your Appalachian Mountains, for example, are older than bones. They popped up way before animals ever evolved bones. So that's why they're very fossil poor, is that they evolved before most forms of life. So we place the Appalachian Mountains at around 480 million years old to right around 600 to 700 million years old. So real old. We had a fossil of a mycelia network, very complex, almost the same kind of style we have today, from around 800,000 years ago to 1.2 billion years ago, or 800 million years ago, to 1.2 billion years ago. So they were around over 1 billion years, if you conventional, but in complex form. So it's not that they were here before that. This fossil that we found, this big chunk of mycelia network, was still as complex as they are today. So they've had a long time to, get more and more and more.
Right.
They were actually the first trees. I'm sure you've seen on some of the old sci-fi shows, they showed the giant mushroom trees and stuff like that. That's not quite what they look like, but they were, sometimes 60, 70, 80 feet tall on the surface.
Oh, wow.
So they were the trees of their day. And several other things were trees before trees. Trees are the most recent thing to take that kind of niche of being these tall standing structures. So they've had a long time. And they occupy pretty much every environment on the Earth. There's fungus that lives on deep sea vents and upper atmosphere. It's just whatever. There's a lot of fungus that loves volcanoes. We actually have some fungus. We have a listener that I can't name that worked with some nuclear materials in his career. And they had to paint fungicide or antifungal stuff on the nuclear containers because the fungus kept trying to get in to eat the nuclear waste. Tons of species that love nuclear materials. Fungus can eat all kinds of stuff, depending on the species. Like we said, the number of species currently today is a very argued thing. Conservatively, let's say there's around 300,000 species. Some biologists put it up, around 12, 13 million species.
Oh my gosh.
And some of these are single cell slime molds type creatures. And then some of these are more the advanced stuff. If we have any listeners in here, if you've ever heard me talk before, I always bring up Bob, which we'll bring up here in a little bit. Bob is very advanced, especially for his age. Any questions about any of that so far?
No, keep on going. This is very interesting.
So we talked about that, and then I get asked a lot. We're going to talk about sentient mushrooms now, or intelligent mushrooms. So these guys, like we said earlier, aren't plants or animals. They're their own thing, and they're much more ancient than either order. And if they've had all this time on Earth, why aren't they smarter? Why aren't they, showing signs of stuff? Why haven't they evolved any further than, possibly 1.2 billion years ago? They looked pretty similar to what they do today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they may already be intelligent. So I'm going to talk about, this is actually 2 years ago, the study came out. So it's very recent. Nicholas P. Money, Dr. Money, is actually here in Ohio. He's in Oxford, Ohio University. He did a study on communication capabilities of fungus. So I'm going to explain his experiment to the best of my ability. So basically, fungus, we're trying to test their memory and ability to communicate. And these are basically aliens to us with how biologically different they are. They're so distantly related to us that it's studying aliens with how they, their digestive system, how they break down what they eat. There's some fungus that eat steel, and there's some fungus that, like I said, eat nuclear waste and radiation, materials. So we don't quite get them. They don't get disease it's a whole different thing. So when we're trying to study their communication and their intelligence, it's very hard because we try to put human abilities on them. We try to put human thoughts, and you can study your dog for intelligence because he knows his name, he knows commands and stuff like that. But you're both have vocal cords. You're both speaking. You both are biologically very close.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about something that's been separated for maybe 100, a billion years.
Right.
So it's very hard to study. So he did a very good job. So what he did is he built a box, and he put about 13 or 14 species of fungus in them, and they developed mycelial networks. And he was feeding them, taking care of them. And then in this box, he gave him the worst drought conditions.
Oh,
He
wow.
did this study several times. And we're going to talk about the communication side of the study first. So he did this with horrible drought conditions. Pretty much all of them died besides a couple individuals. And then what happened is these couple individuals figured out how to hold resources, and they were smarter than the rest of them. They made better decisions with how to spend resources. And then they survived. And then he let them get back up to full health. And then he introduced them into a gigantic box with over 100 species of fungus.
Man.
And then he put them through so in the first study, the first box, about 95% of the fungus died of all these species.
Oh.
So he introduces them into this new box that these 100 species has had perfect life. They've had the perfect conditions. They've never known any hardship since they've grown. He does the same thing. He cranks them up to extreme drought conditions. Instead of 95% dying, 80% survived fine with almost no shrinkage in size.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
What I found out is that the fungus he brought from the other box were able to communicate to the other fungus in the new box, tell them, hey, here's how you survive a drought. Here's what you have to do. And not only do they do this to their own species, so another one of their own kind, human to human, for example, for us, they were able to teach the other species of fungus as well. So this is interspecies communication at an extraordinary degree. And they picked it up so fast that almost none of them died. And so he found this. So that shows you right there that they have some kind of memory.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Have some kind of communication. Now, it may not be something that we can recognize, because, we look at brain cells for memory. And we'll talk about jellyfish here in a little bit because they're an animal I pull up. They are an animal, and people kind of forget that. And they don't have brains, but they memorize mazes as well. So we kind of look at those as an example of an animal that doesn't have a brain, but can still do what we think is necessary for a brain. So these guys memorize stuff. They learned how to survive, and they taught other members, not even of their own kind, how to survive these harsh conditions. So this is an unlevel an unlevel intelligence that we weren't expecting to find.
So I have one question.
Yes, sir.
When he transplanted the mushrooms together, so obviously the new batch connected to the same, like, say, neural network to be able to communicate with each other?
So they don't interface exactly, because then it's hard to explain. So they kind of talk through either chemical or electrical impulses. We're not fully sure yet. They may interface slightly, but they're not losing their self-identity, if that makes any sense.
Right.
They're not being consumed by one consciousness, or one individual's eating the other one in this kind of thing. If they do touch, it's more like you holding hands than like going inside, like a rabbit being eaten by a snake. It's just, they're very alien. It's very hard to explain for, us as people to look at and match our biologies. So he continued this study, and he had questions. So now he knows that there's some base level of intelligence. But what's the base level? Are they extremely intelligent? Are they not? So he wanted to know about resource management. So he started giving the species of fungus he was dealing with breaks down wood, for example. That's their main food source, is rotting wood. They're actually the things that rot wood. They break it down and they digest it. So he was giving them little pieces of wood to the mycelia network. What he found out is that the mycelia network would, if he gave it the closest piece of wood, it would make a bubble around, and it wouldn't digest. It was protecting it from other fungus, but it wouldn't digest it. The second farthest away piece of wood, it would do the same thing. The third farthest away piece of wood, it would do the same thing. And it wouldn't start eating until it was 3 or 4 pieces away.
Oh, wow.
And then it would start digesting the far away stuff. So, and you could take the study several ways. The way that he took it and the way that I took it is that the fungus was resource saving. It was saying that for hardship, I'm going to save the food closest to me if times get tough. And I'm going to protect it from other fungus. And I'm going to eat the stuff while conditions are good. I'm going to extend out and eat as much as I can outward and save these guys for when I need food.
Wow.
But it also proved they can count, which is most mammals can't count. They can count to 4 is what he found in his study. But it doesn't prove that they can't count higher than 4. They can count to at least 4.
Okay.
So if you took one of those pieces away, like he took number 2 away, the next farthest one, it would wrap up again. So it knew it had its 4. And it's like, I need my 4. I need my 4 pieces of food to survive, any hard conditions. So whenever you took one out, it would go, okay, I need to save another one.
Oh,
That's amazing.
So it can count. It has some kind of level of intelligence. Now, like we talked about with the synthesizer, they're hooked up to human brains all the time. The synthesizer, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, came from like basically the same kind of technology that an EKG comes from, to read brain waves and electrical pulses and stuff like that. But a synthesizer turns that into music or, audible stuff. So I consider it music. Some people may not. It can be very simple. So like you guys mentioned with plants earlier, plants do have electrical impulses like any living thing does, but they're much more simpler impulses. When you listen to plants on synthesizers, they're very one-toned or very couple-toned. They're not very advanced for anything, especially when you compare to like a dog or a human plugged into a synthesizer. It's all kinds of notes, it's heavy traffic almost, when you're listening to it. Fungus do that as well. But it's a weird thing, though, because it's very loud and it's very frequency jumpings and stuff like that. But it's very controlled also. So humans may be doing or part of our brain is always the base of our spinal cord is working on keeping our lungs functioning, our vascular system moving, our digestive enzymes being produced. And then the front of house is us, me, you, and you talking. That's this part of the brain up top. But the back part is working on making sure your heart keeps beating. So we have a lot of noise in our heads, even if we don't realize it. And you have, second or third thoughts going on at the same time. They have something that's similar but different, to where they have a lot of stuff going on, but it's much more controlled. And it may be because that they don't have designated nerve systems or designated nerve centers. So, we have parts of our brain that do very certain things, and these guys don't. It's their whole body. Their digestive system and their vascular system is basically a part of their brain too. So it's all one thing. When you look at them on the maps of them, they're all one thing. So, okay, where was I going with that? I got talking too much. So plug them into it, and they start reacting. And these studies with synthesizer, anybody at home, you can look up oyster mushroom plugged in the synthesizer, blue oyster, lion's mane, whatever, plugged in synthesizer. You can find about any mushroom that they've done this with. And they'll be fine if you give them something they enjoy, like a nutrient, something kind of nutrient, they make a different sound. If you touch them, they make a different sound. Here's a key thing for later. If you talk to them, they make a different sound.
Oh, wow.
So right there is a little key piece of information that they may not be able to understand us. I don't think they probably can, but they can register vocals. They can register sound waves. They may not be able to process that information properly.
They might be able to tell you, be able to tell if you're in a bad mood or good mood, or how, if you treat them like your child and you talk softly and lovingly to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have a story for you about that, and my wife's not happy with it because I'm the guy who talks to mushrooms, and now I can't mow the yard. So when you plug them into these synthesizers, they react, and even so, they react when you start cutting pieces off of them.
Oh.
And I don't think it's quite a pain thing. So mushrooms, or the fungal colonies, these mycelial networks, will cut giant chunks of their body off to survive all the time.
Okay.
They don't they move through the ground a little bit too. So everybody, like morel hunters, will know that they're kind of always be in the same area, but maybe not in the exact same spot. That's because these giant mycelial networks are kind of, if you imagine, like a slug almost, crawling through the soil to different locations very slowly, but they do move. So if there's a chunk that's too far behind, they'll just cut it off and let it die. It's not that big a deal to them. So it's like us, it'd be like us cutting off our right arm, but being like, I'll just grow it back later. It's not that big a deal. If I get to move a little quicker into the new feeding ground, it's not that big a deal. Right. So when you pick a mushroom, I'm not telling anybody to feel bad for picking mushrooms. Just please put them in a potato sack or something with holes so the spores spread. That's all.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just a fruit. It's like an apple off an apple tree. The apple's purposely making these bodies to carry off its offspring. So long as you're carrying off the offspring, I don't think anybody's doing anything wrong. But so they react, though, is what I'm getting at, is they know. And some plant, like when we do plant synthesizers, they don't really react to being cut up. They don't have, most plants, some do, but most plants don't really have that kind of thing to be like, because they can't do anything about it. So what's the point of getting freaked out?
Right.
There's not that sense of consciousness. But yeah, so that's the neural network side of it. You guys, what are your thoughts? Do you have any questions?
Well, there's a question in chat if you want to pull up Derek's about.
I had the wrong thing open. Oh gosh, there's a lot of people. Hey guys, sorry.
I'm wondering about sand. Yeah, that just came up. So I was wondering if you knew anything about this.
Relieve a jellyfish sting. So jellyfish stings are kind of weird because they can sting you away after death. Like a jellyfish can be dead. Their stinging cells have like a little hair trigger on the end, and they can be long dead. And once that trigger gets hit, they sting. You're just pretty much with sand scraping off the stinging cells, because the stinging cells for a jellyfish curl into your skin and keep it. So it's like a corkscrew, and it instantly goes into your skin. So when you're rubbing sand and stuff like that, you're just kind of scraping them off. Sorry, now.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's intelligent fungus.
When we were talking about the morels and, making sure you have, a good sack. Now, is that the reason why you have an abundance for years and then all of a sudden you can't find anything in that same area?
Yes and no. It highly depends on it. If you take too many, you're going to hurt the fruiting body eventually.
Right.
also they may run out of food.
Oh, okay.
So if they'll just either move or they'll starve out. So fungus, when we talk about, they're kind of, if you want to call them intelligent, I feel they're at some level of intelligent. Our type of intelligence is very different than their type of intelligence, but I do think they are intelligent. It's not that big a deal for them to die as long as the species carries on. They don't really care that much, as long as, at least as far as we can tell, it's like studying an alien. So these areas for us to have morels and chanterelles and, hen of the woods year after year after year, and then suddenly they stop. It could be all of that. It could be people over harvesting and them not spreading, and the original colony finally gets old and dies of old age, or they're out of food. Each species of mushroom has very, very localized food sources. Some of them are even picky to the type of wood they're eating or the stage of decay they're eating. So if they run out of that in that area, they're out of food. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So is that why morels are more known to be around certain trees? Because that's the wood they like. Okay.
They feed off the root system, actually.
Okay.
Which leads into our next little thing.
Cool. All right.
So mushrooms are so integrated into our biology on this planet that 95% of plant life could not survive without fungus in one stage of their life cycle or another. So 95% of plants need fungus, some type of fungus. Each plant's different, whether it's to germinate their seeds or in their reproductive systems or for their generalized health, which we'll talk about with Bob next, that they can't handle it. Like if fungus were to disappear, they get back in their spaceships tomorrow and they leave. 95% of plants would disappear or die in their life cycle.
Really?
They couldn't survive. This planet cannot survive without fungus. This planet has been, so they're so old that almost all of biology is centered around them. Almost every major environment is settled around them. They are the living soil. Have you ever heard that comments and stuff like that?
Right.
Them. It's there. It's all about fungus. Everything's mushrooms. I say that a lot. I yell that a lot on the show because it is in a way, shape, or form. Like we'll talk about the upper atmospheric stuff here in a bit, but there's not an environment they haven't dominated.
Wow.
Now, with the plant life thing, so plant life obviously directly impacts animal life, whether you're in the open ocean, the seabeds, the kelp forest, or you're in the prairies, or you're in the forest. Plant life, yes, so soil wouldn't exist if there weren't for fungus. Our type of soil wouldn't exist if there wasn't for fungus. There'd be breakdown of rocks over time by wind and rain and erosion and stuff like that. It'd be very, very different without fungus. And we probably wouldn't have any complex life that we could recognize.
Wow.
So we're going to talk about Bob for a minute, if you guys are okay with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bob is a good friend of the show. We have plans to go visit Bob next year. You guys are a little closer to Bob than we are. Bob is the single largest living being on the planet. He is a honey fungus out in Oregon, and his back is about 2,200 square acres.
Oh, my.
Oh,
Let me
wow.
say that again for everybody at home. 2,200 square acres. So he is actually an entire state forest on his back.
Oh, my.
So up until recently, and I mean the last decade, we thought that most species of trees and fungus had a symbiotic relationship. So their mycelial networks would actually hook into the very end, the tiny, tiny roots of the trees. And we used to think it was a bartering system. They would trade certain resources for the fungus, and the fungus would give them certain stuff back. We now know that the fungus is actually hijacking the plant systems on their back. So it's not a trading system. The fungus is in complete control. But it's the fungus's benefit that everybody lives. So Bob, once again, is 2,200 acres. He's around. Here's the hard thing with him is he's hard to estimate his age. On the light end, he's 24 to 25,000 years old. On the high end, he may be 60, 65,000 years old. So on our show, we always say he's about 45,000 years old. And he's been big a long time. So recent soil examining shows that Bob actually kills sections of forest on his back like a clock. And he'll do this. And why he's doing this is grasslands promote renutrification of soils. So he'll kill a section and produce grassland in that section. And then the next system will be here, and the next system, like a big clock on his back. So he's making sure the system is so healthy. His forest on his back is one of the healthiest Pacific rainforests in the world because the soil is killer. And Bob has two sisters that are a little smaller than him. You know, his one sister's like 1,000 acres, and his little sister is like 500 acres. And, you know, Bob's just the big old brother. So he's farming. He is farming the plant life on his back and even some of the insect life. There's some evidence to suggest that some of the ant colonies and some of the simpler insects are being completely either forcibly controlled or kind of suggested by Bob what to do with kind of reward systems.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say when you brought up farmers that, you know, it's like a farmer has to rotate its crops and consistently, you know, feed the soil depending on what it is. And Bob is like a steward of the land, evidently.
100%. All fungus are, but Bob just happens to be gigantic. So Bob was discovered in, I believe it was 1915, 1916 era. They did a core soil sample out here, and they came back the next day, and 100 acres of trees had died. They had no idea why. And then they finally figured out they cut through basically for human anatomy. They're not what they're really called, but imagine like a giant artery of Bob's that was feeding that whole section of woods.
Wow.
These trees were so dependent on Bob. They didn't know what to do when he was cut off from them. And they leaked all their fluids and died. They dumped fluids and died. Pretty much overnight. So they stopped because they didn't know what happened. And they came back and did surveys. So they started doing DNA testing. We didn't actually know how big Bob was until, you know, relatively recently. Ooh, I got some stuff for you later, Donnie. Good mind,
wow.
Donnie. So where was I? The DNA. We didn't know how big Bob was. And the honey mushrooms are a little pink mushroom. They kind of look like oyster mushrooms. They're gorgeous. And we started doing testing all over this valley and figured out they're all identical. Not that they're cloned, because there's markers for cloning. They're all identical. It's all the same organism.
Oh, wow.
It's all one Bob. You can walk about 4.5 hours over Bob's back and not be.
Oh, my gosh.
And it's one guy. And so if he's conventionally, honey mushrooms only go down to about 10 feet deep. So, you know, if he's conventionally that depth, I believe he's around 6 million pounds or so. If he was all put in one pile. If that's conventional, though, we have never studied a fungus this big. So if he's conventional to his species, he only goes down 10 feet. Let's say there's a cavern system down there he's in. Or, you know, he just is strong enough to go through some harder materials and actually get deeper. And he's 20 feet or he's 30 feet down. You know, it's tripling. You know, we're talking about an organism that maybe 200 or 20 million pounds or 25 million pounds. Our biggest blue whales are right at 500,000 pounds.
Wow.
You know, Bob is gigantic. And I try to bring that home because it's really hard when you go out to this forest. And I forget the name of it off the top of my head. When you go out to this forest and you look out and you just realize you're looking at one organism. It's a truly amazing experience. For me, I'm a Christian. So it just, for me, it shows God's power when you look out at it. Just show you kind of creatures that live. And we don't even realize that they're right around us. You know, Bob has been walked on for, you know, probably tens of thousands of years. And nobody knew that why this valley was so fertile.
Wow.
So Fifth Light Bandit says, are there other Bobs around the world? Yeah, so like I said earlier, there are two that we know of. Is two sisters. And they're much younger than him. But they show every signs of getting as big and as powerful as Bob. As far as that, though, it's very hard to find these. Bob was kind of an accident, like we talked about being found. You know, when you they do a soil sample survey, and they killed 100 acres of forest. It's very hard to find them. You know, it's kind of accidents because his species of fungus generally gets the size of a tractor trailer. You know, they're big, but they're not, you know, giants. And when I say size or tractor trailer for everybody at home, I mean volume. You know, it's, 50, 60 foot long, 10 or 20 foot wide ish, but they're like, they can be any shape or size, but roughly that size. So for Bob to be this, we don't know if it's perfect conditions. Some scientists have suggested that it was because there was a great cataclysm out there and Bob was one of the few survivors. in his young days, and he took advantage and he started perforating and took control, and he made of almost the Garden of Eden, this fertile valley on his back, to where everything is in tune. And he, like I said earlier, he will kill whole sections of forest, but it's for the future forest benefit. Whenever the nutrients start getting too low, he'll start wiping out.
Who named him Bob?
So he had a couple different names. Bob's the one we liked the most and we went with.
Okay.
But he's been called Bob and George and stuff like that. I believe the original name was Bob or Robert. They named him. And then George was like in the 60s. People started calling him that. So in our research, we stuck with Bob because it's just a fun name for a fun guy.
There you go.
I got to take a drink.
All right.
That's cute. What about Bob?
Now, funny thing is Bob's mushrooms, the mushrooms he produced on his back, are nothing special. They're identical to honey mushrooms from all around the world. They don't look like anything. So he's very inconspicuous. The animals help. So
named him
Andre the Giant.
So that's Bob. What do you guys think about Bob? I love it when I tell people.
I think I've heard of Bob before, but I saw something else. I don't know if it's related, but it's somewhere out there where there's a species of trees that they were talking about. Is it growing on top of Bob? They've been talking about here lately.
That's out in Europe. Sutan, something like that is his name. The trees.
That might. It's like the oldest species of trees. It's all one organism.
Yeah. Similar, so it's like bamboo.
Wow.
To where a whole bamboo patch is actually one piece of bamboo.
Right.
It happens to pop up in multiple places. So I think it's Gutan or Sutan or something like that. And that's in Europe. And he's a whole forest too. And Bob outweighs him about 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
But it's not to say that those trees are not gigantic either. It's just Bob's really big. But yeah. So I've told you a lot about fungus biology. Everything that we've pretty much gone over is pretty conventional science. You guys want to get in some woo?
Yeah, let's get into the woo.
We love woo.
So do you want Bigfoot or do you want orbs first?
It doesn't matter. What do you think? Doesn't matter. Either one.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. I want to talk about both.
So we'll do orbs in the Fae.
All right.
So orbs are seen almost exclusively in wood lines and trees and forest kind of trains in the desert. It's very rare for orbs to be seen in industrialized areas or in home areas. There'll be house orbs. I'm more talking about the big blue and white ones that we associate with the Fae and Bigfoot and such. What did Donnie say? I'm sorry.
He asked if Bigfoot could communicate with his feet.
Donnie, have you heard him talk other places? Donnie, I think you're cheating.
He's probably reading something. I don't
know. Anyways, so we don't see these type of orbs that we associate with forest spirits or the Fae or Bigfoot in urbanized areas. This is also an area we don't see very good fungal growth. And we've all heard the legends of fairy rings, correct?
Right. Yep, we've had them.
Yeah, we've had them in our backyard.
So fairy rings are often associated in every culture. Fairy rings are associated with portals or otherworldly entities, whether it's Africa or Alaska or China or Australia, and especially here in the U.S. It's the same legend-ish. There's little tweaks here, nudges. It's the rough same legend across the whole world.
Oh, wow.
So, and it's an ominous ring. So what causes those rings is a fungal circle growing underground. They grow in a circle, and they dump nitrogen. And we don't know why they quite do this. There's a couple arguments in biology about this. It's a very argued subject. But we don't know why they do this. They grow in a circle, almost an exact perfect circle, and they dump nitrogen. And that's the circle you see is the plants, obviously loving all the nitrogen. They're like, yes, please. So the grass on top of them gets darker, or the plants grow taller and stuff like that. Some fairy rings are truly massive, 40, 50, 60 feet across. And you can see some of them from space. Because of plant growth on them. So whether it's positive or negative, it's almost always associated with what every culture would kind of call similar to the Fae. It's also very similar to a particle accelerator.
Oh.
Now, this is, crossing the science with the paranormal. So what we kind of think, and my co-host isn't here tonight, but we came up with this theory together, is that this is a place, like we said, I think they're very intelligent. I think they're very conscious. They've been hearing our voices, our radio signals forever. And they can pick up, I may have left that out earlier. They can pick up radio signals. We have a lot of evidence to suggest they have heard us say everything since day one. They may not be able to understood it, but they know there's another presence. So what do humans feel about intelligent life? We long to meet other intelligent life because it makes us feel not alone. So why would we assume that another intelligent organism wouldn't have the same feeling? So to us, talking would almost be like ghost, that you can't really, it's not tangible to them.
Right.
It's a whole different wavelength, but you kind of get the sense that something's there that you would think is intelligence. So we think that they are using these fairy circles to basically accelerate some particles, and the nitrogen may be a byproduct. And they're using this to pop into our dimension, the third dimension. They come and experience Earth. I think most of the forms they take, once they kind of pop up, they accelerate energy and they kind of pop up, is these orbs we're seeing. And they're experiencing our world through these balls of light. And it's not, they're almost like their consciousness, they're astral projecting. They're going through, and all these people that say they talk to orbs and the orbs react and stuff like that, just like mushrooms. And I think that some of these bigger fungal colonies could take it a step further. I think they start, so we talked about Bigfoot earlier. I think what's happening is that they can kind of read our thoughts, but maybe not understand them. So all these people that go out, and so I had a Bigfoot encounter, but my Bigfoot was very much flesh and blood. It was scared of a gun. It was stealing chickens for food and stuff like that. But we've had people on our show where they have the woo side of Bigfoot, the glowing red eyes. They walk right off cliffs. They're here 1 second, then they disappear. And I don't doubt those people. I 100% believe them. It's just not what I experienced.
Right.
My experience was very scared of being dead and very scared of us, once we had a gun, and wasn't scared of us until we had a gun. So what are these people experiencing? It's almost like it's two different phenomena putting on the same face. So what I think is happening is these orbs are actually the Fae folk of old, that they have weird, because if you ever hear these old stories of the Fae, their thought patterns are different. They don't, communication with the Fae is very odd. It's almost like talking to aliens and stuff like that. And time moves differently for them. So these orbs are experiencing people. And these people, let's say they're going out there and they really want to see a Bigfoot. And that's all they're thinking of. You're walking in the woods and you're like, Bigfoot, Bigfoot, Bigfoot. So the Fae, these mushrooms, put on the face of Bigfoot. They're like, this is what they want me to look at. This is what they want to see. So I'll give them it. But it's not the traditional Bigfoot. They're still energy beings at this point. So they have the glowing red eyes maybe, or they get some details wrong. We talk about these really skinny, weird looking Bigfoots. And, and that may be because the person thinks of Bigfoot a little differently and they're reading those thoughts and projecting them back. And we've talked about some of these Bigfoot being nature spirits and being guardians of nature. That is these fungus themselves. That's their job. That's their environmental role. So what if they're putting on these faces, become big and scary, to become this thing to protect their environments? It's their defense mechanism. Think about all these weird cryptids that make no sense, that are seen one time, and it's just these horrific monsters. And almost always what happens is they're scaring people out, and they don't have any physical contact, because you may not be able to make physical contact with them. They make lots of noise and they look scary, and they charge you and stuff, but they don't do anything. It's just like, because they're almost like light projections. It's like a hologram being produced by the fungal network you're walking on top of.
Oh, okay.
And Jay, my co-host, even has the idea that Bigfoot has connected, the flesh and blood Bigfoot may be intertwined with the mushroom networks, the fungal networks, and maybe either guardian as a coexisting or a beneficial species arrangement, to where both of these species, the Bigfoot knows that the fungal network, the intelligent network, keeps the forest healthy. But they have to protect these fungal networks, which are very fragile to human disruption. For how strong and how long they live, it's really crazy how little human interaction takes to just wipe out some of these species. So what if the Bigfoot are protecting these guys as a part of that, whether they're not their actual projections? So
I've always thought instead of them going in the portals and disappearing and cloaking out, is they're using their energy and instantly popping into orbs and taking off, and we don't see them.
So it's the same thing. So it's just that the orbs are mushrooms. And, you know, they're still disappearing, or they're going out, they're flashing out. And I think you're right that some of these Bigfoot are doing that, or they walk by. I've heard the stories. We had a guy on the show that had one walk behind a tree, this giant Bigfoot, you know, 4 or 5 foot wide, walk behind, you know, a 2 foot wide tree and just disappear.
Right.
And it's impossible. And, you know, it's impossible unless they're not, you know, they're light beings, you know, they're the mushroom energy. But there's science to this. There's shapes. They actually build up giant masses of electricity. So they can produce stuff if they know how to work their own energy sources. You know, we're talking about some of these, like we said, the biggest living organism on the planet. You know, the amount of electricity or energy that thing can kick out if it really wants to, and it gets a burr up its butt that it wants to explore, or just even check out its garden that it's, you know, it's farming on its back.
So that is so interesting, because you're the first person I've ever heard say this about mushrooms or the organisms be able to project an image or whatever, you know, to protect an area. Because when we're on shows or people talk to us, it's always like Bigfoot, you know, makes knocks on trees and awakens the elementals in the tree, you know, to be able to use a portal. Well, maybe it's the mushrooms, or
Right.
So I think it's definitely the other way around. And I'm not saying this is all Bigfoots or all Dogman. I seen somebody said something about Dogman. I think those are all real things everywhere else. But every once in a while, when you happen to encounter one of these mushrooms in their energy form, if you have that on your mind, like literally this past weekend, we met a lady that when she had her Bigfoot encounter, she had the glowing red eyes type. But she and her sister were like, we're going to meet Bigfoot. You know, we're going to see Bigfoot. We're going out in the woods to see Bigfoot. They turn around the corner in this woods, and there's this weird looking Bigfoot standing by it. But hearing her explain it, and we're going to have her on the show, but it doesn't matter. It's not a normal Bigfoot. When you hear her talk about this thing, it's off. You know, even for what we kind of think conventionally a Bigfoot looks like, it's off. But she did the whole thing I just said, that she went out there with this thought pattern of we're going to see a Bigfoot. And they were little, you know, they were younger kids at the time, like 15, 16. So, you know, they may have been fun. You know, they may have just been goofing around. But if they ran into one of these mushrooms and they wanted, and it may not be anything negative. I don't think it has to be negative or anything like that. They may not understand us like we don't understand them. So back to what I said like 40 minutes ago, is they're very alien, you know, to us. You know, they're 100% different. Their biology is different. You know, their genomes are different. It's just they're aliens in every aspect of the word, except not being, you know, they're probably here from Earth or maybe not, which we will talk about.
So the mushrooms may have picked up their thoughts or their energy and manifested what they were wanting to see or project it for them.
And it may have been even for communication purposes, trying to understand us better. If you want me to look like this, I guess I'll put on this look for you. You know, it's a very, you know, but this alien nature. So we talk about the Fae folk more in depth. A lot of the Fae folks are like tricksters. You know, they have fun with us. Not in a horrible way, but a lot of their jokes involve maiming of humans or even death of humans. So think about what I talked about with their biology. They're not scared to lose limbs in their kind of aspect. They're not scared to even die. So if they are trying to communicate with us, think about that they have that in their culture, if you want to call it that losing a limb is not a big deal. So if they manifest to us, they kind of put their thoughts onto us. Like, well, losing a limb is not that big a deal. So if the joke involves you losing a limb, it's not that big a deal, right? But to us, it's a very large deal. So that's this weird. And when you look at some of these old stories, and we did episodes on the Fae stories, when you look at these old stories of the Fae and you look at them with that lens now, it starts making a lot more sense when you hear about the talks and the communication. And then there's time dilation. So mushrooms are the fastest communication system on the planet. We're using Japan's making microchips with fungus in them because they transport data faster than any technology.
Wow.
So when you're in the let's say you go into their world, or you actually get pulled kind of into their thought space, And you hear these people going in through the Fey portals, and they spend a day there, and they come back, and it's 20 or 30 years later. And it could be the time dilation thing, that they are in these accelerated things. But we've heard the reverse too, that people spend 30 years in the Feywilds, and they come back, and it's been 30 minutes.
Right.
You had kids over there. You had this whole thing, and you come back, and it's so vivid. You remember all this, and it's not, it didn't happen, or did it? I think they're slightly on a different wavelength. And we've talked about this with the visible light spectrum. Humans can only see about 4%. So if a creature only shows up in the other 96% of the light spectrum, you wouldn't know it was there.
Right.
We're talking about stuff that could be the size of dragons or whatever, and you don't know they're there. And the other side of it is the kind of the dimensional stuff with mushrooms, that they are in their own world, having their own communications, but they don't have eyes, they don't have ears. So they're experiencing the earth in a completely different way.
I'm glad you went
Wow.
back to the portals and the Fae and stuff, because I was going to ask you earlier when we're talking about the mushroom circle or the fairy ring, that like legend is that if you go or be lured inside the ring, that you disappear, or they take you to another dimension. So is that the mushrooms, or is that really a Fae story, or what do you think?
Yes. I think it's probably the mix. I think the Fae, in most cases, I think the Fae are actually the mushrooms. It's their communication, and it's just them trying to put on a face for us. And they're aliens, so they don't understand the differences of our biology. That, the time dilation stuff and the death stuff, like death's not a big deal to a mushroom because they stay forever. Can you please talk a bit about some of the giant prehistoric mushrooms? On there was the size of, or wasn't there? So we talked about that earlier, Donnie, and you may not have been in here. So yeah, Donnie, they were the first trees. And what I mean by that is they, some of them got 60, 70 foot tall as far as some of the fossil records go, and they dominated. They were forest, and they didn't photosynthesize. They were still more like us, but they were just giants. So yeah. And then once plant life came down, they were either outcompeted or took a different route, but they were the large first things on land by a long shot. And they're much older than both plants and animals.
Are they known to be like on, how would I say, on top of a tree and light up?
Okay.
And it's hard to explain, well, first of all, we live on the edge of town. So we have ATN night vision binoculars. There is a field in front of our house. I don't see one arm. I go in the backyard connected to this 50-acre field that's connected to our backyard. There's orbs all over the place. It's a field of orbs. Well, now this summer, we caught this phenomena on top of our tree, shimmering out and powering up, and it looked like a Tesla ball, and nobody can debunk it. We don't know what the thing is. So I was wondering if we had a fairy ring of mushrooms in our backyard at times, does that mean we've got portals in this, like the backyard field area?
So when we're talking about these portals with the mushrooms, it's a portals into their kind of version of reality. It's not like what we talk about when you see Dogman going through portals and Bigfoot going through portals and stuff like that, or these interdimensional portals. It's a little different, but you very well could. I think a lot of these orbs, and I'm not saying all orbs, there's never a lump sum of everything. Same with UFO. You can't put everything in a box.
Right.
But I do think a lot of these orbs are these fungus experiencing our version of reality in their own time. Now, with the thing you said about lighting up, there's another cool mushroom fact for you. A lot of species of fungus are actually extremely bioluminescent. So when we look at bioluminescent in fish, vertebrates, and some insects, they're almost always bioluminescent because of some other thing they have in their body, a different organism that they're taking care of. They raise a colony of in sections of their body. Fungus do it independently. And it's very odd as for a complex species of anything to be independently bioluminescent. Now, keep in mind, we talked about mushrooms don't have eyes. They don't have anything visible. Scientists cannot explain why they're bioluminescent. And some of these giant bioluminescent ones in the Amazon, flash in complex patterns that some biologists said is reminiscent of communication. It's almost like flashing. But what's it communicating with? They don't have eyes. They don't have any light receptors that we can find. Now, let's say that there may be some part of their anatomy that it's so complicated that we can't figure it out yet. It may be another 100 years before some biologist can look at some minute detail and be like, oh, this thing detects light. But we don't know why. The best leading theory right now is it deters bugs from eating the fungus. But it's not very accurate, in my personal opinion, and a lot of other mycologist opinion. That's kind of like a wishy-washy answer just to fill in the blank for now. But they produce light. It's just, they're incredible. And they're like the living nerve system of the earth. So there's gigantic ones. And for some of the other ones that we're talking about, Bob, there's some gigantic ones in the bottom of the ocean floor that we cannot study very well because it's at the bottom of the ocean floor.
Right.
Wow.
And they may be 100 miles across. And they may not be, we don't know. But we do know that something is living in the silt. So there's a show called The Rig.
Right.
Have you guys seen it?
I've seen it.
So do you know what that creature is?
Uh-uh.
And everybody at home, spoilers alert, tune out if you don't want to. I highly suggest you watch The Rig. It's really good. That's actually a giant fungus.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
And it tried to communicate with people, but they were drilling in it, trying to kill it. So what did it do? It just dropped a whole continental shelf to flood out the people.
Oh,
And,
my gosh.
So back to Bob for a second, and we'll come back to fairies and Bigfoot.
Bob.
Bob is very good about weeding out invasive species. Bob does not like invasive species. They'll actually drain nutrients and water out of the soil where these invasive species are trying to take hold, and he'll starve them out. His little valley is almost impervious to most of these invasive plants and bugs. He'll actually develop some amino acids to help protect. So if one tree figures out how to develop an amino acid to get rid of, let's say, like these lace flies that are near us,
Right.
that are drinking the trees dry, he will pass that enzyme to every tree in that forest. So instead of taking generations for the population to become immune, they're pretty much immune overnight.
Oh, wow.
So for invasive to take hold on top of Bob is very difficult. And I personally believe that these giant organisms were much more common until we started drilling roads and we started digging quarries and we started doing heavy agriculture because it cuts them up. And they're still there. It's just they're not these 2,200, 300 acre, these monstrous creatures. Well, let's see.
I got two questions about Bob.
Yeah.
Does Bob have any sections that glow or luminescent like you talked about?
So as far as we know right now, and as far as I know, no honey mushroom is bioluminescent.
Okay.
But he is that state forest on his back is full of orb lights. It's almost like the Brown Mountain of the West.
Okay. And have we ever planted anything else amongst Bob to try to get like you said, the fluids in it for the evasive plants or bugs or insects to try to develop another system like him, whether it's corn or flowers or trees or?
As far as I know, nothing like that has been done. He's pretty much, since his actual discovery, has been left well alone as a marvel. And how we talk about the invasive stuff is that the valleys near him have high amounts of invasives, and Bob's valley is pretty much none.
Okay.
That's kind of how we know that he's doing something. And the studies are very, biologists argue all the time. Anybody at home, I was a biologist, I can tell you that if you go to Google and you type in something and you get an answer, it's probably 51% of biologists think that's right and 49% think that's wrong. Most of these big biological quote unquote facts are still being highly argued and debated in biological circles. It just matters who gets the biggest published article first. So once again, it's weird about facts is they can be opinionated. It just matters who has the most money.
Yep.
So let me see where I am with my notes. Sorry. Oh, we talk about psychedelics here in a minute. Let me see what I got with the Fae. Anybody got any questions in the chat?
I've been trying to bring them up as I see them.
I talked about the weird interdimensional creatures. So the weird thing with these, a lot of these fae folk that we run into know a lot about us. They know a lot of facts about us, and it's very, especially we did a whole episode with, I said modern fae encounters, but it was within the last 100 years, and it's crazy how many, and they'll know your name, they know your mom, they know your dad, they know all these weird little facts about you, but they can't have the basic human nuances of interaction are lost. They don't have any of these thoughts about personal space. They don't have any of these thoughts about, what's an appropriate joke, what's not. And it's very much seeming that like I said, they take in all the data that we're giving out, whether it's vocal or radio waves or even some types of radiation. They take that in, and then they turn back around and they can spit it back at you like a parrot. But when you get more complex stuff, that's when you start losing. That's the fae folk. So that's where we kind of connect them back to the mushrooms. That if they're getting all this data from us, but it's like a computer almost. Think about them kind of like that. That they are very intelligent. They're very complex, but human interaction nuances are kind of lost on a computer when you're talking to these AIs and you're talking to that stuff. They'd miss kind of the point, and that's what it seems with the fae folk. They kind of miss the point when you say certain things. So if fungus are intelligent, couldn't it also be argued that viruses are as well? I don't know about intelligent viruses, but at the very end, if we have time, we can talk about virophages. If you guys remind me in the chat, I'm putting it on you people.
Yeah.
Because that's a show.
Leave it on Donnie. He'll remember.
Donnie? Well, maybe that'll be another show.
Yeah. Virophages are probably God's hands at work. It's very odd. But whole different thing. Now, before we get into the UFO part of it, you want to talk about psychedelic entities?
Yes.
So once again, everybody at home, I've never done a psychedelic. I have some close friends that have, and we've actually kind of studied some stuff with the psychedelic entities. And I'm not saying all psychedelic entities are these, but I think a good chunk of them are. So when you're taking psychedelics and you start meeting these things on the other side of the veil, so piercing the veil, that you're actually talking to the consciousness of these fungal groups.
Oh.
You're actually some way, shape, or form branching that gap into their world for a short period of time. So these psychedelic entities almost always are extremely happy to meet you. They're very, very excited to meet you. They always seem surprised that you figured out how to talk to them. So it's almost like a lot of these times, and we've interviewed a lot of people about this. And this is not everybody's experience, but this is a lot of the people we interviewed. That they are very excited to talk to you, and they're very surprised that you figured out how to talk to them because they haven't figured out how to talk to us on our terms. So they talk about stuff, and I don't know if you guys have ever done psychedelics, but a lot of people that have almost describe them as mechanical gnomes. And that's a weird thing when you think about it, right?
Right.
A mechanical gnome. Hundreds of thousands of people have experienced these creatures and said that they were like mechanical gnomes. So what we talked about with mushrooms earlier, they're almost like computers with how they work. They're very mechanical in their thoughts. They're very mechanical in everything they do and how they kind of decide food and they move and stuff like that. The gnome part, I think, is maybe, I don't know the correct wording, a parable or something for garden gnomes or gardeners. So these giant computer gardeners are what you're talking to, and they're very excited to talk to you. A lot of these, the one guy we interviewed talked that these entities said that we can always hear you, but we can't interact with you. So that's why they were very excited. A couple of the others said that they were excited because they weren't alone in the universe. We're talking to these entities that are just excited to see some other kind of intelligent thing that they can talk to for a few minutes. Because, psychedelic trips are often very short. And I think it's because you're changing your brain wavelength to kind of match their reality. So you're kind of bleeding in. So like we remember all the way back about an hour ago when we talked about Dr. Money's study. We don't know how they communicate with each other. We just know they do. So if they have something like we've called a collective unconsciousness with humans, what if they just have a collective consciousness? That's almost like the internet for them. So when you take these psychedelics, you're kind of lowering your wavelengths into their world. So you're the new user popping in, and they know you're different than everybody else. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
So they would be like, say, speaking dimensionally wise, so they'd be like 2D and we'd be like 3D to them. Where we, so like you said, we have to lower our frequency or our consciousness to get down to their level so then they can recognize us.
I think that's a good way to put it. I really think that is. So they can always hear us and we can't hear them. And that's the perfect example for the 3D versus the 2D, is that stuff goes down, not up, unless they're really trying. And these orbs, I think, are them trying to go up. And us doing these psychedelics is us going down. But that's not to say that everything you see on a psychedelic trip is a mushroom. There's a various catalog of other entities. Some are extremely negative and very scary. I don't think that's fungus. We're more talking about these mechanical gnomes, which are the most common thing. And it's crazy that these people that are doing drugs in Africa, these psychedelics in Africa, are experiencing a very similar entity in description. And same with South America, China, the US, where they call them little goblins or little, whatever their word is for these little short creatures. They're often associated with gardening, but this almost robotic, or they still have some kind of emotion, but it's much more robotic, almost like Spock, when you see him on like in Star Trek and stuff. Don't trust the psychedelic entities. Every time I bring up Jesus, they always try to give me the shifty eyes. That's why I say, here's the thing with these psychedelic entities is he's 100% right. Don't trust anything, because you don't know who you're talking to. This is my thought of who some of them you're talking to. Definitely not all. My big key is if they try to interfere with your life, they're probably not mushrooms. It's probably something more demonic in nature. Another thing is the psychedelic entity study. So in Australia, they did a study, I believe in 13. I don't know who that user is, but that's funny. Don't put that one on screen. So that's a little different than what we're talking about. That's a little bit of a different thing. It's made me laugh.
We need Brown Dwarf in the chat now.
So the study in Australia did this study with these psychedelic entities. These people trained to ask these psychedelic entities questions. And it was like basically kind of like Google Map questions. So the guy that was going into the psychedelic trip didn't know where this thing was. So he's asking for like a doctor's office in Sweden. I want you to give me the address of a doctor's office in Sweden. A lot of times they were very accurate. They would give a full addresses or full pieces of information that the test subject was not privy to. So that shows whatever you're talking to is not just your brain, playing tricks on you. There's something there, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, who knows? I kind of think that some of them are mushrooms and some of them aren't, but who really knows? That's a science that probably won't be understood for another 200 or 300 years. And everything.
You think they're using the Akashic record or something, or how are they getting this information? I wonder.
That's a great question. So remember what I said earlier is since we've started the radio wave, since we've started frequencies, they've picked up everything.
Wow.
So we have willingly handed over every piece of information about our society, every piece of knowledge that we've gathered up until this point. They have access to. So I don't think they have to do the Akashic records or anything like that for them. It's just in the air. We're pushing out all this information through satellites and through internet and through Bluetooth and through the radio waves that they've just picked it up. And they're the best data storage system on the planet. So to them, it's nothing. Like I said, we're actually using them for microchips, because they're better than anything we've built.
Wow.
Would we ever be able to hook up Bob or something like that to the internet to data mine our stuff, or us use him as a reference?
I think you would be able. I think that technology, that interfacing technology, is probably still a good distance away. because I think it would be very hard for one of these funguses to understand what they're looking at, because it'd literally be like a piece of alien technology trying to hook up to our technology, completely
Right.
different format. So once you could figure that out, sure. Their data processing power, if you want to put it that way, is 100-fold anything that we have today. Their Bob can transfer. Let me get it right now. Let me see if I remember it. So a blue whale, from the tip of its tail to its brain, takes about 3 seconds to get the data signal of pain or anything like that. So if something bites the tip of a blue whale's tail, it takes about 3 seconds to reach the brain, and it takes about 3 seconds to go back to say, to do something about it. So all around, it's a 6-second loop. Bob can get data across his entire body in about 1.5 seconds.
Wow.
And we're talking about something the size of 2,200 acres. So we're not even sure how they do it. You can look it up online, everybody. And that's what I'm saying with biologists arguing about this stuff, is that you can look it up online and see what happened. But you can look up and see another credible biologist saying a completely different thing.
Right.
And stuff like that. So do your own research. Everybody always do your own research. This is my opinion on this stuff. But Bob's speed, nobody really quite understands. There's some theories, but it's not just electrical. And that's the big deal. And it's probably some type. The only difference between the paranormal and technology and science is understanding. So it's all paranormal until you understand it. So I'm sorry.
No, our dog is acting up. She's gonna go see what's going on.
No, it's probably Bob.
That's probably Bob.
You'll have a little mushroom guy out there. So let's see what is. You're not talking Borg type Well, I don't think they're evil or anything like that. I think if anything, the only problem with humans is that mushrooms, if they are more like computers, and they're very environmentally oriented computers, they're all about the perfect and balance of environment. So humans are not.
Right.
That could be the only issue I really see with that.
And the Borg's like a collective intelligence or collective where they all have the same thing at the same time. I mean, Bob's kind of that way, right?
Yeah. And yeah, it very much is. But the thing is that all these fungus, and we're talking about, hundreds of thousands of species, are still individualized, but able to collectively communicate. It's a very hard thing for humans to understand because we don't have anything like it, to where it's not an ant hive or an ant colony,
Right.
where they're all working as one thing. There's no consciousness there, but it's very well organized. It's very well done. And the mushrooms can do stuff like that, but they also can almost make what you would call decisions. They have to, from life experiences, and they'll try new stuff. They'll venture out to new territories, and they'll often die in these new ventures. They'll do stuff that kills them. And it's like us, as humans, it's that free will. Your dad tells you not to go ride on the motorcycle without a helmet, and you do it and you die. That was your free will choice. You didn't listen. But in an ant colony, if the head says don't do it, you don't do it.
Right.
So it's somewhere in between. It's like I said, they're pretty much aliens. So it's really hard to put our understanding on them. So mycologists, I have a couple mycologist friends, and it's always fun to talk to them because the field of mycology is so open because nobody really understands anything. It's just like a big, that's L science, everybody at home.
I think it's funny that we're sending radio signals or searching for signals out in outer space for aliens when we actually got something below our feet that we could communicate possibly with that has been receiving our signals all this time.
Exactly. I think it would be easier to actually talk to aliens right now than fungus, because their existence is so an alien would have a spaceship and get over here in some way. So already we had more in more in common with them than these giant fungal networks, besides intelligence. Did I miss any good questions? Oh, mushrooms are magical. Like I said, the only difference between magic and science is understanding. So yes, mushrooms are magical, but so is science.
They're trippy.
So are we about to the UFO part, or where are we at in your?
Yep, we're there. I just mixed myself another drink.
All right.
Awesome.
It's just pop. Wink. Oh, that's really strong pop. Okay. So we're going to wind back. I know everybody in this chat probably has mixed feelings about NASA, but we're going to talk about NASA for a minute. So once again, I was a fishery biologist. A couple years ago, and I had this idea before Nope was even a thought. I had it on the radio waves before Nope was a thought. You guys seen that movie? Nope.
What's that?
Nope.
Have you seen the movie Nope?
Nope.
No, I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, it's basically a giant flying mushroom that's a UFO.
Oh.
But I had this idea 2 years before that movie came out. Before we get there, because I don't want you chat to light me up. Is my idea. But I got obsessed with organic UFOs. The thought of these animals or whatever in the upper atmosphere are some of UFO sightings, a small portion of UFO sightings. Not all UFOs are these things, but like 5 to 7% when we look at it, I think are organic creatures from our own atmosphere. They're from our own biosphere. So they're, whether they're whatever. Like in Sweden and Australia have giant manta rays and jellyfish that are often seen. And they're seen here in the U.S., but those two countries specifically have a ton of them that are seen, including we just got turned into our website a manta ray sighting in Australia. A huge fan of NASA. I heart their ice cream. It's all scientific. Oh my gosh, I love Donnie. Donnie, you should listen to our show a little bit more. You think?
He's doing good.
So we did this first episode probably 2.5 years ago at this point about the Ohio River manta ray, which was our first. It's right. We're in Ohio. It was a giant jellyfish-like manta ray doing these giant figure eights flying over the Ohio River. What I love about these, so when we do a lot of these cryptid sightings, we do the ones that I can find a police record for, or I can find some kind of newspaper clipping. I want something tangible. Whether I don't care how old it is, I just want something I can look at and be like, somebody else talked about it. It's not just some guy coming onto Reddit saying he's seen one, which I do believe sometimes, but it's when it's tangible, when a newspaper talked about it or whatever. So this one had police reports. It actually had 2 different eyewitness statements from 2 different counties at the same time that they didn't know each other.
Oh, wow.
That's why I 100% believe this story. Because these 2 people went to 2 different police stations at the exact same time saying, yeah, I seen this thing. And they had no idea. This is, it's 2006, so there were cell phones, but they weren't like what we had today.
Right.
It's not instant, somebody's tweeting or somebody's putting on Facebook, man, just seen this giant flying manta ray over the Ohio River. Watch out, So that's why I think the story. So we did more in this, and we started getting tons and tons and tons of reports. Sent into our website, sent into us. It's one of probably our first big break in the podcast world was doing this. So we started doing this. So we started looking into some NASA stuff. So NASA did upper atmospheric studies, and we'll talk. So we live in the troposphere. That goes to about 10 miles up. And then right after the troposphere is the stratosphere. And right after the little bit of a lip of a stratosphere is the ozone layer.
Right.
And then the ozone layer, or then the stratosphere continues up to about 25 to 30 miles up. And then it's the mesosphere. So for the longest time, we thought no life could live above the ozone layer because of the radiation and the coldness and stuff like that. You hear as you go up higher, it gets cold. Well, thank you, Amber.
Good night, Amber. We love you.
Thank you for the kind words. As you go up, it gets colder. You've all been taught that in school.
Right.
To a certain spot. And actually, once you get above the ozone layer, it goes back to getting warm again until you hit the line of the mesosphere and the stratosphere.
Oh,
wow.
And it's actually about 50 degrees, and there's liquid water available up there. So it's the largest single environment on the planet. So the early shuttles going into space said that when they're leaving the atmosphere, they had a green film on the window for a couple seconds, which we'll talk about.
okay.
So NASA's in 2019 was the big one. They built these boxes of life to grow life. So here in my field of work, they were called, for water, they're called Hestradendes, named after a guy. Had an awful name, Hestradendi. But what they are is microbe and bug hotels. So they're full of food and they have little tiny spaces for everything to grow. They're there to promote life to grow. So you put them in environments in any kind of species. We use them to count species and stuff like that. So they did this right up to the ozone layer. They put them on giant balloons. They left them for about a week right below the ozone layer. So they're technically right at the line of the stratosphere in the troposphere, right in the ozone layer. They left them up for about a week. The retrieval was kind of poor because they weren't really expecting much. Most of these scientists were expecting to find maybe 14 species of anything. And I mean anything from bacteria and fungus and microbes.
Right.
They're not expecting a lot. They brought it back down and they actually found about 4,000 species. And they found a representative of every clade of life that doesn't have a spine.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
I'll say that again for everybody at home. Every clade of life that doesn't have a spine present. So we're talking about clades are big. They're the big orders. So there's a jellyfish representative up there. There's insect representatives, there's fungus representatives, there's plant representatives up there that are living up there. So the biologists actually think there's probably closer to 12,000 species in these Hestradendi boxes, but they kind of were really slow on the retrieval. And the problem is the little packets ran out of food. So what are the animals going to start doing? They're going to start eating each other.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when they pulled it back, they had about 4,000. They think it may have had 12,000 if they were to get it back on time. And then what happened in 19? Anybody? What happened at the end of 19?
Oh, right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So they didn't do it again. So these biologists were really jacked because they found all of this life. We're talking everything from some cousins of worms to jellyfish to all this stuff to tons of species of fungus. Living up there. And then nothing. They haven't done it again, at least publicly. And everybody, NASA, you can look at any public NASA document. If you type in the Upper Atmospheric Biological Life Survey, you can pull up these documents. They're about 400 pages long, 500 pages long. So that was a quick synopsis for you. But please read them yourself. They're very cool. You can do it all. It's all this data you can check yourself.
So could we use that to repopulate the Earth if we ever have a disaster, or maybe populate the moon or some other planet with that life?
If the environment was similar, so all it is doing is taking kind of a screenshot of what's living up there. Most of that stuff will not live very long, and most of it was dead when it came back down to the lower atmosphere.
Okay.
It's like taking a deep sea fish from the bottom of the ocean up. They don't survive the trip.
Right.
Same conditions, coming up, down, lower pressures, temperatures skyrocket. So the question is, how did all this stuff get up there?
Yeah.
So also in 19, before COVID hit, is they started doing these studies about mountain ranges. So around these mountain ranges, it's called detritus. Detritus is just stuff in water. It's just stuff in the water column. All those little specks of all kinds of stuff, from algae to poop to wood debris. It's just called detritus. Our filter feeders in the ocean environment eat detritus. A lot of them, that's what they're doing. They're eating small organisms and just debris. We found around these mountain ranges, there's gigantic funnels of this earthbound detritus shooting up into the upper atmosphere and actually breaking through
Oh, okay.
the ozone layer. So there's these pillars of food being pumped up there. So the layer that, like the stratosphere and the mesosphere, has liquid water. It's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very similar to an open ocean environment. So like we've talked about with fungus and all kinds of life appalls a vacuum. It will fill every niche, every cranny available. So like we've talked about with some of the organic UFOs, is that like the jellyfish, for example, they look just like jellyfish filled with air. These giant jellyfish are seen in Sweden and Australia and some parts of the U.S. So in Australia, they're seen around the Blue Mountains. In Sweden, they're seen around mountain ranges. In the U.S., they're seen over Appalachia. Pretty much nowhere else. So what did I just tell you about mountain ranges? As there's these giant funnels of food
Right.
Mhm.
the upper atmosphere. They also, if you're a gas-filled organism, they would act like an elevator back up to your environment.
Hmm.
So if you get knocked down here, unfortunately, you don't want to be here. You don't want to touch stuff. It's a way to go back up with using little to no energy. All these organic UFOs, except the last one is the mushroom ones, are using these mountain ranges to get back up or feeding or breeding or something. They are commonly around oceans and mountain ranges because oceans kind of do the same thing. They push these giant thermal vents, kind of push up into the upper atmosphere. So if you're a giant glider, it kind of helps you go up. I gotta take a drink. Sorry.
That's all right.
Why is there more activity on certain mountains than other mountains, just like the Brown Mountain lights?
I think it's people. I think it's just the number of people that can witness this.
Okay.
So you talk about the Rockies. I think it's still happening in the Rockies. There's just not as many people that live in Appalachia.
Yeah.
So there's not as many people to witness the phenomena. The Blues are Blue Mountains in Australia. That's where we've gotten a lot of our write-ins from.
Hmm.
They have a lot of people living in them, and they're a common like tourist camping destination. They're highly populated as far as Australia's mountain ranges go. The other mountain ranges in Australia, I think, probably still have these creatures. Just nobody goes to them. So you can't have a phenomena without a witness. So I think that's what's happening a lot with these certain specific mountain ranges. Now, we're going to go all the way back to the 60s and 70s
Okay.
Ooh, our childhood.
and talk about first with Betty and Barney Hill. So the famous, I promise everybody I'll get there. Detritus, that means the name is the biggest city in Michigan after. Oh, that's funny. Donnie's on fire.
Oh, Donnie.
So in the 60s and 70s, we're going to start with the Betty Barney Hill incident. So Betty and Barney, Betty, some people know this, probably some people don't. Betty was a UFOologist enjoyer before their encounter. She loved UFOs. Her and her sister would talk on the phone for hours about UFOs. They wanted to be abducted. Betty did. Barney, and we're going to talk about some racial stuff with Barney. Barney was a black man that was a postmaster in his town, and his town was very well received in his town. But for a black man in his time to hold any kind of authority was highly looked down upon. So Barney lived a very scary life with a lot of people that just didn't like him for being a black guy in an authority position in his town. So he lived a very stressful life. And, when we talk about the gun in their encounter and stuff like that he had in the trunk was because he'd actually been roughed up by, Klan members and just some other people that just seen a black guy with a white girl. He was white and Barney was black in a time where that was not acceptable. So when we talk about their encounters, that's something to really focus on.
Okay.
So Betty and Barney were leaving. They got the urge to go see the falls out of nowhere. They did, they had no idea why they did it, and they did it. And they start coming back, and they see kind of this light following them for a little bit, and they kind of ignore it. And they go through this weird construction thing. These people tell them, you got to take the detour. And as they're going, they see this giant. They pull over, and this giant UFO lands beside them with all these lights, and these beings come out. And here's where the similarities end. So for Betty, she was taken aboard the ship. She was shown maps and shown charts and shown books and was treated very well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry for the language, but Barney was pretty much raped. And
Right.
he had pain and he was tortured. And he wouldn't talk. This event probably killed him from his brain aneurysm much later. I don't know, only like 4 or 5 years, whatever. So they experienced the same ship, the same creatures, roughly, and wholly different experiences. And then they experienced lost time. So they got back in their car, and they don't remember getting back in their car. And then if you remember from their encounter, they woke up kind of driving home.
Right.
And they had about 3 hours of missing time that they couldn't explain. They get home, and they start telling, it gets out because Betty is very happy with her encounter. Barney is not. Barney actually developed warts around the area of his. That's a hell of a thing to cut out on. Barney developed warts on his penis, and was starting having what people some believe was he maybe had little heart attacks or some kind of stroke. Like he was having difficulties with the stress of this all.
Wow.
So eventually they get a visit with the Men in Black, and this is one of our first big encounters with the Men in Black. So Barney talks about the Men in Black. They were asking Barney questions, and I think it was question 74, if I remember our episode on it. Barney was asked, "Did you have any nitrates in the car?" And Barney's like, "What the hell's a nitrate?" And he's like, hot dogs are high in them, fertilizer, whatever, And Barney's like, "Yeah, I had 400 pounds of fertilizer in the trunk." And he's like, "Do you still have it?" He's like, "No, it's gone." And then he moved on from the questioning. The Men in Black would never go back to it. And this was odd enough for Barney to talk about this later. That he's like, out of all the hundreds of questions he asked, that's the one that didn't make any sense. Why'd you ask about that? Why? So in the 60s and 70s, this happened often with the nitrates. There was a hot dog truck, a semi driver that was driving hot dogs in Chicago. Literally same kind of thing. This UFO kind of stopped him in the road. He seen the lights. He talked to beings. And then he was just left standing on the side of the road. He gets back in his truck and the trailer's empty. It took all the hot dogs. And it's happened with fertilizer plants and nuclear power plants are both producers of nitrates and radioactive materials. And also here in Ohio and many places around the world, UFOs are seen a lot around dumps and garbage plants. And they also produce lots of nitrates, liquid nitrates. So most species of fungus love nitrates. It's their favorite food source. So let's say you're a flying giant fungus. So we all know the psychedelic properties of fungus flesh. But did you know a lot of species can produce spores or dust that is also psychedelic?
Oh, wow.
So if these mushrooms are feeding on this stuff, they want the nitrates as food source, and they get near you, you start tripping out. And if anybody at home that's on psychedelics, your mindset is heavily dependent on the kind of trip you'll get. Betty had this she was so excited to see a UFO. And so you had what these people that do these trips would say, she had a good trip. Barney went into it with a very negative mind. He was literally, when the UFO landed, he was looking for his gun in his trunk because he thought people were coming to get them.
Wow.
So what did he experience?
Right. So it's almost like a UFO mood ring.
Yes.
Wow.
And nothing the mushroom's doing on purpose. It's just you being around them is causing this phenomena because they're probably shedding psychedelic spores so they can, and then they're feeding. So people have asked me, well, why didn't they just eat Betty and Barney? If this thing, is essentially a big organism and it's eating the fertilizer. Well, because it's a flying organism. So flying organisms have to be very careful about weight distribution and taking on weight. So you eat highly nutritious food. A human, for them, is not very nutritious. If you look at it, we're full of blood that's not very good, excess water. We're a lot more weight than we're worth.
We'd be like junk food to them.
Yeah. The nitrates is pure food. It's just unadulterated. It's done. It's already processed for them. Same with the chemical plants. Same with these junkyards. And certain cattle mutilations may be a part of them too, feeding on these cattle. If you look at the organs that are being taken, are the high nitrates and some amino acids are super rich in.
Oh,
So
wow.
Oh, interesting.
Cattle and taking very precise organs because they don't want to take on the extra weight. And we see this with all flying organisms that we have today on this earth that we know about, that they are very careful about what they take on. These buzzards and vultures are very careful about bone fragments because they're not very nutritious, but they take on a lot of weight when they're trying to digest them. But marrow is, so look here. But yeah, so and we look at all these, and it's weird because the Men in Black asked this question to hundreds of witnesses. When we did that episode on it, we found all these people that said they talked to Men in Black. And this question in the 60s and 70s kept popping up and kept popping up and kept popping up. Now, I don't know why they maybe slowed down, whether there's more cars on the road or it's a different type of electrical batteries that kind of are disturbing them. But we look at the stuff like Skinwalker Ranch and the Tic Tac UFO. We'll do this Tic Tac UFO first. I think that these are your more UFO shaped ones. They're almost like the two saucers on top of each other, or, you know, actually, I'll try to show it. So this is our cup, and that's our kind of idea what these things look like.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like two turtle shells on top of each other, and they
A hand pan.
A hand pan.
yeah, and they actually open up with feeding tentacles and stuff like that.
Oh.
And we'll talk about that here in a minute.
Maybe
Like,
that's why they like my hand pan in the backyard.
so the Tic Tac UFO, was, you know, it's famous now. It's, you know, it's well overdone. It's that shape though. It's a very similar shape. And if you guys watch that video, everybody at home, it almost looks like it's playing with this guy. It's
Mhm.
beside him, it's beside him, it's in front of him, it's behind him. And then when it gets bored, it shoots off and disappears. So if anybody at home has ever experienced a dolphin with a ship, that's what they do. They play with the front of the ship, they play with the back of the ship, and then they keep playing because the ship's so much slower and less maneuverable than them. And then they get bored and they just rip off. So I want everybody at home, if you want, rewatch the Tic Tac video and think about it being maybe an animal or a creature. And it makes a lot more sense with its behaviors. It's not scared of anything. It's playing with it. And then it gets bored. And then it just takes off. It does something else. I think they're actually using compression chambers to fly with a little bit of gas-filled sacks and like hollow bodies. Skinwalker Ranch, they're a real famous one. And I know that show is very mixed opinions in our field of work, you know, about Skinwalker Ranch and the evidence they collect. But they on one of their drone or one of their just cameras that face the sky that you can watch online. So this is not one of the part of the show or anything like that. They caught what looked like this turtle shell falling straight out of the sky like a rock. At the very end, it does a loop and it takes off like Mach 3.
Wow.
And it just looks like, I don't know if anybody's ever seen bald eagles mating and stuff like that. They'll actually lock talons and drop from the sky, and they have to not break talons until they get close to the ground. And then that's how the female will let the male mate then. And it's very similar to that. There's a lot of, when you start looking at some of these UFO encounters with an organic angle, it starts making a lot of sense because all these people ask questions about like, this doesn't make any sense. You know, if it's aliens or it's technology or it's interdimensional, it doesn't make any sense. But if you start watching them and looking at them like they're an animal or a creature, a lot of these start connecting dots and they start making sense. It's playing, it's having fun, it's gliding. So this is probably my last, unless there's a lot of questions, my last little story.
Okay.
Everybody can ask any questions or whatever. Is the Colorado disc. And here's where all this started. I heard the story when I was a little kid. It got buried, and then I found it again. So this pilot, and he was actually a retired military pilot. I don't have his name on top of my head, but you can listen to that episode on our show, and we give his name because he actually came out and talked about it. And this was in the 80s, I believe. He had his own private plane, and him and a couple friends wanted to go eat on top of one of these mesas in Colorado. So there's a big mesa, and they land on top of it. And they're spending the day up there. You know, it's hard to get up there, so they're going to spend the day and have fun. The whole day, up in the top of the sky, they're seeing little glints of light. Almost like if anybody's ever seen little schools of fish. And then when they move real quick, you see almost like glitter, and then they all disappear again. So the whole day, they keep seeing this in the sky. And this is the 80s. They didn't bring a camera or nothing with them, and I doubt it had done any good if they did. And they just keep seeing this. After a couple hours, this thing starts falling out of the sky, and it's about 6 foot in diameter, and it lands on the mesa with them.
Oh, wow.
And it's hard and metallic. It looks like silvery metal until they go to the side of it, and they see a chunks missing out of it, and it looks like organic stuff inside. So it has like a hard metal shell almost, and then organic stuff pouring out of it. They said it was quote unquote bleeding, but it was almost like a golden stringy liquid. So it wasn't a liquid, but it wasn't a solid, but it was golden color pouring out of it. And the creature was making tons of noise. It was obviously in pain, whatever it was. And then the sides of it would open up, and it had little tentacles and eyes. So its shell could open like a clam almost all the way around though. And it would have little eyes and tentacles and stuff like that. And it was closed and open, and it was in pain. They watched it for several minutes. And out of nowhere, they see this giant one start coming out of the sky. And it's coming buzzing in. And it looks just like the creature from Nope. This is actually probably where they got the inspiration from it. This giant metallic-y silver creature. And it buzzes in and grabs the little one, doesn't care about the people, and just takes back off up in the upper atmosphere. The pilot and his friends thought it was the mother of the creature coming to rescue it. I doubt it. I think it was the predator coming to reclaim its prey. It knew it had injured
Oh,
That's what I was picking up.
looking for it and found it and grabbed it. So with the biology, does it sound weird for an organic animal to have a metal exoskeleton or metal colored exoskeleton? Does it sound weird to you guys?
yeah.
Mhm.
What if I told you we have examples of that all over in nature? So the first one we'll talk about is the ironclad snail. And as the name suggests, it's a giant deep sea ocean snail that eats sulfur, magnesium, and sulfur iodide. And it pushes it out through its skin and incorporates it into its skin.
Hmm.
It literally produces a giant skin suit of armor,
Wow.
Wow.
like a big iron snail. Or it depends on which volcanic vents they're on in the deep ocean. If they use sulfur, magnesium, and stuff like that, they'll be magnesium colored. And they look almost like a bronze snail. Like you dipped a big snail in bronze and pulled him up. So animals doing this is not odd at all in nature. There's all kinds of creatures like crayfish will actually build their exoskeletons. Most people think a crayfish comes out of its old exoskeleton and it's soft. Do you know how it gets hard again?
Yeah.
It actually is pulling chemicals out of the water around it, hard chemicals to make its exoskeleton hard again.
Hmm.
So all that stuff that makes it rigid is pulling out of the environment. It's not being produced inside. So this is not. Now, why I think these are mushrooms is the weird organs and the golden blood. Yeah, they have some. It's very similar to some mushroom species we have that almost bleed gold, and that's a common thing in giant mycelia colonies. When you cut them open, they bleed almost gold or metallic colored stuff.
Wow.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of connections when you really start looking at the dots. And once again, I'm talking about 5 to 7% of UFOs. There's a very small subset of UFOs. Some people get very upset when I talk about this at UFO conferences and stuff like that because they think I'm talking about all UFOs and all abductions. No, I'm talking about a very small set of these things. But there's thousands of encounters. It's truly insane. So what do you guys think about that?
That's very interesting. I would have never ever put those two together.
Wow.
Okay, what is Donnie saying now?
Well.
That wife so magnificent. Yes. What was I gonna say? There was something.
He did have a
story.
question up there, and then somebody else said something about he's asking for like-minded people. So I'm not sure what Donnie's question was up there.
So I started talking to the mushrooms about 2 years ago when we started doing this stuff. And I don't know if it's actually them responding to me talking to them or if it's just because I stopped mowing around them. Like I left them alone. But we had one pop up about 2.5 years ago. Now, here's the thing with mushrooms is don't ever pick any guys at home unless you're 100% sure of the ID. So here in Ohio, we have two very similar ones. We have what's called a devastating angel and a green scaled mushroom. They're big, white, tall mushrooms. Both are common. They both go the same time of year and they both kind of look similar. Devastating angel will kill you in like 10 minutes. In a green scale is semi-edible. You got to cook it a lot and you can eat it.
Wow.
But I had one and I started talking to him. Now I got like 50 of them in the backyard and I can't mow. We have a bunch of like red cap mushrooms and stuff like that in the front yard. I mow around. We've actually almost got in trouble with the town for leaving them grow because we will mow around them.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be a little bit of grass with them and stuff like that. So it matters how you want to take it. It's either they're reacting to us. I talk to them all the time. Whenever I have to mow one, because I won't mow them until they start to rot, because they're done. Once they start to rot, the fruiting body's done anyways, so it doesn't matter, in my opinion. I tell them, sorry I'm mowing you, but you're done anyways. And then I'll talk about that here in a second, Donnie. And And then if I have to mow them, like I said, we got in a little bit of trouble with the town. I it's not me. I have to do this stuff. And they grow back fine. But we have tons. Like there's probably 40 of them in the backyard right now.
No, my.
I've seen a couple of them pop up. I don't think they're in the grass, so I'll leave them alone and start talking to them.
And we know that they can at least hear us in some sense of the word. Whether it's the understanding is the big question.
Okay.
And like Donnie asked, how are the super deadly mushrooms kill people? Exactly how does it kill people? It's very different depending on the species. Some of the amida mushrooms, like your big white and red spotted ones that everybody's famous, some of those are edible, and some of those will actually take apart your central nerve system, and basically you'll die of either your heart stopping or you're not being able to breathe while you're conscious. So it really is highly dependent on their type of poison they have. The thing is, if you don't see animals eating them, you probably shouldn't eat them.
Mm-hmm.
Or give them to a pig first. That's what they used to do. Really? Anybody? We're getting towards the end, I think. Anybody have any questions generally in the chat or anything like that?
Well, I've got one. When you say mushrooms are actually flying up in the sky that are actually UFOs at times, do you know of them that you can't see them, but they show up and power up and then dim down and just kind of disappear? Would that be a ship, or do you think that would be mushrooms?
I really don't know at this point. It could be either.
Okay.
I really think it's hard to tell with the far off encounters and these like the lights. So like we talked about with mushrooms being bioluminescent, I think some of these big great light shows we see. So firefly squid, for example. Firefly squid are a little 6-inch long squid. Has anybody ever heard of Christopher Columbus's UFO encounter with the sky sea lit up?
Yep.
It was probably, not to burst anybody's bubble, firefly squid. So in one of his writings, he talked about it as modern day, it almost looked like a disco floor. So these little squid will actually gather up by the millions, and they'll synchronize their light shows, and they'll make the ocean look like a giant disco floor when they're breeding. And if you don't know what you're seeing, it'll be sometimes a mile wide. And so if you're sailing on a ship in a pitch black night, and all of a sudden the whole ocean is grid squared, and they make really hard lines. But yeah, so I think the same with the upper atmosphere, that sometimes these light shows we're seeing could be them trying to breed.
I think you touched on this question earlier, but Tex wasn't in here earlier.
Do you think there's a specific reason they tend to grow in circles? So yeah, Tex, if you can listen back, because we covered that pretty extensively. But we don't know. That's a big thing in biology for mycology. We don't know why they grow in circles. I have my thoughts why they grow in circles, because it mimics either a hadron collider or a particle accelerator, and they're using it to actually transfer energy into our version of reality. Question for the guest: what, in your opinion, is the most delicious mushroom and why? I like lion's mane. Lion's mane. So we didn't even get into medical benefits of mushrooms.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Lion's mane are the only chemical. They have the only chemical on the planet that shows to reverse the damage of Alzheimer's and dementia.
Oh, wow.
And there's a lot of people researching it. And they also taste like lobster, if you like seafood.
Now, is that similar to the hen, whatever the
Very
other one?
different. So it looks like a giant. So somebody said they used to pick sheephead mushrooms. That's the same thing. They look like big white. They look like they have a bunch of white hair on them.
Okay.
Okay.
Almost like a puffball covered in these.
But it's not the ones that go on shelves.
No.
Okay.
They're like big balls that grow with fur on them.
Huh. Are they the puff ones? Puff mushrooms?
No, so puff balls are different, which are edible.
Okay.
And that's the problem, is there's a lot of species of mushroom.
Yeah. Right.
How do you think these UFOs that are mushrooms or whatever you're describing, how do they propel themselves, or how are they getting around in the atmosphere?
So from eyewitness encounters and stuff like that, the mushroom ones seem to be basically, it's kind of like, it's hard to explain. They take in air in the front end, they hyper compress it with a muscle, and it shoots out the back end.
Oh,
So they're making their own compression for forward and backwards. And I think they have a large hollow cavity inside with some kind of gas to help lighten up the load. So they're not as heavy as they look. Or if they are as heavy as they look, they have these big gas-filled areas that kind of help lighten up the load, like birds with hollow bones. They have these areas with nothing in them that so they still have the structure, but they don't have the weight capacity of it. And then they're actually actively moving with these high compression chambers. So you talk about like the UFOs that are rapidly changing midair. They talk about these, or pilots couldn't do that because you splatter inside the ship, you splatter inside the plane. These things are specially designed for it, where they can right turn on nothing. They're type of propulsion.
Yeah. What was the other kind you said that was turkey something?
There's turkey tails and pheasant backs, but freak geek? Freaky geek. There's a lot of mushrooms that grow on the side of the trees that look like those that are not edible. I'm telling everybody right now, take a class. That's what me and my wife did like 4 years ago before we ever started. My grandma used to know how to do it, and she passed away before I was old enough to really get on it on my own. So me and my wife took a class to get comfortable with the species around us. And keep in mind, wherever you live in, even if you're in the same state, where you're at in the state can be highly different species of mushroom. Question. Let's cut to the good stuff. What are some of the military applications for this mystery fungal technology? A lot. We're talking about computer chips that are thinking faster, thinking smarter, or being able to transfer data faster than anything we have commercially available. So yeah, that's pretty much, it's just making computers think faster, which is, if you're talking about military applications, is always better. I also think if you harnessed one of these things up, it'd be much faster. You made one of these things a drone. Imagine have this giant Mach 4 flying UFO.
I'm sure if the government can figure it out and they can utilize it, they will.
Oh, they will. Just about every plant has a mimic growing next to it. Yeah. So yeah, every mushroom pretty much. Like morels are easy as far as the mimics. You cut a morel open. If it's hollow, it's good. If it's not hollow, don't eat it. But even the morel mimics don't look very much like morels.
Yeah, they're a little darker and they come to a point also. Those were the ones that my mom said, do not pick them. They're like black and they go to almost like a witch's top, like a point.
It's kind of like the ones you're talking about. You can boil them and get the poison out of them, and you got to re-boil them like 3 times to lessen the poison so you can eat them.
Is there any
you have to boil something 4 or 5 times to eat it. Don't eat it.
Right, yeah.
God trying to tell you, don't eat it.
Cardboard or piece like shoestring.
I guess if you're starving and you really need to eat something, that's fine. So let's see. Be Kind says so many deadly mushrooms. And it looks so similar. I am too scared to try my hand at harvesting any in the wild. I haven't studied enough. So Be Kind, like I said earlier, go to one of these classes. So here in Ohio, they're offered, and I just know Ohio because it's where I live. They're offered all over the place. Well, this time they're like $50, and they'll take you out to like a public woods and kind of teach you what you're looking for, and they'll give you a little guide with it and stuff like that. And look at what you want to find, because there's tons and tons and tons of mushrooms. But like we talked about morels, everybody starts with morels. You can know what area they grow, what type of trees are around. Often morels grow with May-apples here in Ohio. So when you see this big patch of May-apples, like, okay, start looking for morels. So
if you can't find them, you can buy them online dehydrated.
Yeah, you can grow morels too. We grow them in our greenhouse as well.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah, so we grow morels, lion's mane, and blue oyster.
Oh,
which are all great. Let's see, where's some others?
Oh, that'd be fun.
Let's see. I'm trying to see. I'm bad about ignoring the comments. Let's get controversial. What are your thoughts on those who would paint Christianity as a mushroom cult?
What?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure where he's going with that, but
Donnie, I'm sorry, Donnie, I don't know what that means. I'm sorry.
I think that's a whole different show than what we're talking about.
Yeah. That's most times the one that if you eat it, animals get to it.
Well, I actually think this is probably a good time to end.
Yeah.
And we'll give you the opportunity to talk about your podcast and how to contact you. If you want to give out your email or however you want to do it, that's up to you.
Yeah, thank you. So once again, it's Cryptids of the Corn podcast. Me and Jay do it. We've been the #1 nature podcast. I think we just hit 4 times in the U.S. this year. So we're very proud of that fact. If you want to contact us, the email is cryptidsofthecornpodcast@gmail.com. We're pretty good about it, but we also have Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. We're pretty easy to reach out. We have a YouTube documentary series called Lawn Chair Documentaries. We're working on our second and third film at the same time. I have something for that. If anybody here in the chat has ever seen a hyena in North America, please reach out. We've already got tons of eyewitnesses that we're doing with the show, and we're always looking for more, though, because it's much more common than people think. And that's what we talked about a little bit.
Well, it's his show of Jessica talking about misidentifying hyenas for dogmen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hyenas are very scary looking anyways, especially when you're not expecting to see a hyena.
Yeah.
Like I said, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We do our Facebook live show every Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 9 a.m. Sorry, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The hardcore pop is starting to take hold. I'm trying to think what else. Jay normally does this part because I always forget something. But yeah, that's pretty much. We got a merch page. We got all that stuff. We have fun with it. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you guys for having me. It was fun.
We need to have you back. I mean, 2 hours wasn't enough. I mean, we could have kept on going, asking questions. This is so interesting because I see a lot of UFOs and lights, up in the sky. Some of them flash, blink, disappear on me. Now I'm wondering, like, okay, how many of them are mushrooms interacting with me?
Now, next time you go out and you see one, just talk to them and see if the UFOs change or the orbs change in any way, shape, or form. I don't know if they're all that. Sorry, I cut out. I don't know all that, but I do think there is some of that out there. And I think you may be surprised with some of the results you get.
Interesting.
Well, everybody, this has been fun. Don't go anywhere if you have time to stay after the show a little bit. Make sure you go to his podcast on YouTube and wherever you can find them and tune into them and subscribe to them. And
Freaky, start from the beginning and watch, dude. My question is, can you start from the beginning? I missed something.
You can watch the whole show here in a minute at your own convenience.
Oh, we have a good chat here. We love you guys so much. Oh my goodness.
So make sure you go to Cryptids of the Corn and find them on YouTube and all the places he told you and how to get a hold of them. And this has been a great show. We just loved every minute of it. It was so informational. Yeah. Thanks for opening our eyes to a lot of this.
We need you back, definitely. This was absolutely amazing.
Thank you. I had so much fun. I'll come back anytime you want.
That's awesome. Right. Everyone, we will see you late Wednesday night, Thursday morning, 12:30, half an hour past midnight, Wednesday night for our next show. If you guys are up and awake and you can't sleep, we will probably be here till probably about 3 o'clock Central in the morning.
Or later, depending on how active the chat is.
Right.
So we love you guys. Thank you all for showing up. Love and peace to all of you. Be kind to others. And be sure to go to Cryptids of the Corn and check their podcast out. And we'll see you all next time. Everybody be good, especially you, Donnie.
Yeah, Donnie, behave. Love you.